sometimes when everybody remains standing, I think they're trying to give me a signal not to preach. But I never fall for that. We're celebrating the feast of St. Benedict, who is considered the first monk in the Western Church. He wrote a rule by which monks and nuns of the Benedictine family have been living their Christian lives for about 1,500 years. So anything that lasts that long must have something good about it. But then I was presented with the problem of talking to people on the Feast of St. Benedict who have no inclination at all of entering a monastery, right? I mean, none of you have changed your mind. You're all getting married still. Okay. We never get recruits from this weekend. I don't know why it is. But you know, there is something we have in common. Because all of us are trying to follow Christ. And all that St. Benedict did was to, in a very troubled time, in a very, very bad time socially, was to devise a little rule of life by which he thought men, eventually his sister got into the act and he gave the rule to her and she started a monastery of women, a rule that would help them to live the Christian life by getting back to basics. And so the values in his rule are certainly just as applicable to us as to you. Benedict was, we think of saints as these holy people that their feet aren't touching the ground. Well, he was a college dropout. He was. He went to Rome to study. He said, in this environment, I can't live the Christian life. Rome was falling apart. And he left, he dropped his studies, went off and tried to be a hermit. He didn't succeed at that either. He was a failure as a hermit. So then a couple of, one monastery of monks saw him and said, you know, we really need him as our leader. So they talked him into giving up his hermit life and coming down and being the head of the monastery. But he was too strict for them, so they tried to poison him. You know, these were great times, you know. Eventually, he did begin to found groups of men who wanted to follow Christ according to his rule. And one of the things that we have in common, I think, is because he went back to the Bible, to the Acts of the Apostles, where we saw the early Christians gathering together as followers of Jesus, not to form a monastery. These were married folk, single folk, all kinds of folk. But they did certain things which are still essential to the Christian life, just like Benedict ascribed the same things for his people. First of all, they prayed together. And I would suggest to you that the couple who prays together will stay together. Your vocation, your calling is to married life, just as mine is to monastic life. And we have to follow our call. That's how we are true to God. But if he is the one who calls us, we need to be in communication with him. And communication with God is called prayer. And prayer together will bind you together for the rest of your lives. Because the same God who has called you together is going to strengthen you to stay together in the days ahead. You know, Benedict thought that his monks would live this angelic life together and be really model Christians. But in point of fact, we're just like everybody else. We have our days, we have our moments, and we have our disagreements. I mean, even though Brother Michael lives with an exemplary person, I'm sure we have our fallings out, you know, we have our disagreements. But the point is, that's part of human life, whether you're married, you're in a monastery, whether you're at work or at school. But Benedict taught us how to, as Peter said here, to maintain constant love for one another, serve one another, share the gifts you have with each other, look out for each other. Because that's what love means. Love means wanting and actually willing what is good for another person. Now, the other person in your life is going to be your spouse. But it's my experience that if two people love each other in this way, it sort of ripples out. It's the fallout. The fallout of a good marriage changes the world, changes the community. Because love is never anything that stays to itself. You can't keep it leashed. If love is genuine, it ripples out to the children, to the relatives, to the co-workers, to the members of your community. Whoever speaks must do so as one speaking the very words of God. That doesn't mean you have to be a preacher. We don't need more of them. But you preach by the way you live, by the way you join your different lives together in one, and therefore mirroring the love of God to the world. So there is a lot that monks and married people have in common. We don't have children in common because obviously we're celibates, but we do have spiritual children, people who come like to monasteries for peace and quiet, where God has a chance to be heard without the din of society and the freeway and all the problems of life. So I think that we are all just different ways of representing life in Christ, life as church, life as the people of God on a journey back to the Father.